So before we start, let me just say that we should have a good bit of time at the end today for any questions or discussions about this or any of the previous sessions. My presentation is not too long this time, only about a half hour, and then we can talk. So this is the last in our series about a sequential approach to learning and teaching the cello. We've spent the last 6 sessions discussing warm-ups, bow technique, and using a sequential approach to learning and teaching scales, etudes, and literature. So today I'd like to sum up our explorations with some generalizations about teaching writ large, and then specifically some thoughts about what makes for a successful studio teacher. And then we'll conclude with a sort of self-examination checklist. Don't be scared about that. We're not going to be checking on your score or anything like that. This idea is to help us become better teachers, of course. Things to think about and to ask ourselves in order to improve our teaching. So what we do as private studio teachers is quite different from classroom teaching or teaching in large groups, but there are some similarities. And I'd like to start with some generalizations about teaching and look at some research that was described in a book by Charles Revis called Extraordinary Educators: Lessons in Leadership. In this book, he describes profiles of 6 superior educators whose students achieved an excellence far beyond what might be expected of them. The subjects in this research were a choral music teacher, an art teacher, a speech and drama teacher, a girls' basketball coach, and principals of an elementary school and a secondary school. The major finding was that, without exceptions, the leaders gave a high number of correctives. This may seem obvious, but having sat in on many lessons with young teachers, I can tell you that often these teachers either didn't know what to say to the students to help them correct some issue. In other words, they didn't have the technical knowledge to draw on to describe how to fix a problem. Or often they just wanted to be their friend and not their teacher, so they wouldn't give them the nudge that they needed. With these superior educators, any deviations from their high standards, even minor ones, were corrected quickly and not infrequently quite sharply. Other significant findings were they were purposeful, demanding perfectionists. They had a sense of humor and tended towards self-deprecation. They gave only a limited amount of praise. They stressed self-discipline, responsibility, and always doing one's best. And they attained a high amount of time on task. So for the next part of this session, I want to focus again on the studio teacher of the intermediate cello student, not the absolute beginner and not the most advanced graduate student, but the range that's in the middle. We started this series by talking about the qualities that made for a successful teacher of an intermediate cello student. Here are some other generalizations about the qualities that successful teachers have in common. We'll call this a profile of a successful studio teacher. So first of all, they need to be more than just a great cello player. They have to have an understanding of the bigger picture with knowledge of related areas such as kinesthesiology, or knowing how the body moves, history, knowing how music fits into what was going on in the world, art and literature, philosophy, as well as the obvious music theory, musicology, cello technique, and literature, etc. A good teacher has to be aware of the psychology of teaching. I never actually took a psychology course, but I feel like I've been successful in figuring out what makes a particular student tick, almost like getting inside their head and understanding how they best learn. In other words, what makes a student want to be successful? Are they competitive? Do they want to work towards competitions? Do they like figuring things out like a puzzle? Do they just love music and want to play because they love the sound? Do they want to improve themselves? How is their work ethic? How can I help them in the best way while also following my own philosophy and pedagogical methods? Why are they actually taking lessons? Are they taking lessons because they want to play the cello, or are their parents making them take lessons? I once had a very talented 12-year-old student named Ivany who always came into the lessons really well prepared and was playing major literature on a high level. But she didn't seem very happy. I taught her for a few years, but finally in one lesson when she seemed particularly sad, I asked her why she was playing the cello. She said because her mother is making her play and that she really didn't want to. I then decided that I didn't want to participate in having a child forcibly taking lessons, so I talked with the parents and then stopped teaching her. About a year later, I got a telephone call from Ivany. I said hi, and she said, "Dr. J, I decided I want to take lessons again." I asked if her mother was trying to force her to take the lessons, and she said no, she really wanted to. Well, we started lessons again, and when she graduated from high school, she went on to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a really great school in Boston, to major in engineering. But she was the principal cellist of their orchestra, which was an excellent orchestra made up of really smart students. Sometimes we have to be a mentor for the students, helping them to make life decisions and maybe even being a counselor to them. Each student is different, and each student has different strengths and weaknesses and different needs. But having one-on-one lessons with an adult who's not a family member is a really unique situation in our world today. And it's also a prime opportunity for helping young people in so many different ways. Obviously, a cello teacher must have a comprehensive understanding of cello technique in order to help solve technical problems for a student. It's not just a matter of being able to play well, but we have to know what it is that we're doing and then be able to explain it to the student. We have to be able to dissect a technical problem and have multiple ways of approaching a solution. Just demonstrating something is not enough. Sometimes demonstrations can be effective, especially for an advanced student, but that's not always the answer, especially for an intermediate level student. And the same is true for teaching musicality and musicianship. A teacher may be a wonderful performer, but if they can't explain how they do something, the concept may not transfer to the student. A teacher has to be a good communicator. They have to know how to communicate effectively with their students. I've sat in on lessons with teachers who really don't know how to communicate well with a student. Very often, young teachers haven't thought through how to verbalize or explain something that they themselves take for granted. One needs to have a range of activities in a lesson: playing, listening, talking, feeling, making the lessons a rich experience. And one needs to use a range of emotions in a lesson: being happy with something a student does, or being not satisfied with something, or to laugh at something, and possibly being upset at something, using a loud voice and also a soft voice, modulating the voice, and maybe talking about something personal with the student about how their day or their week is going. As we discussed in the last session on repertoire, we have to be sensitive to finding the right level of pieces and technique for the student. As I mentioned then, a good rule of thumb, as it were, is that the pieces they play should be easier than the technique they've mastered. This way, the student can focus on achieving the highest level of intonation, tone, and style. Otherwise, the student ends up focusing on the difficult technique and their musicality suffers. As teachers, we're responsible for picking the right etudes and the right repertoire for our students. I think it's of utmost importance that we spend some time in our lessons to teach and show our students how to practice. We're with our students for just an hour or so a week, but they are hopefully spending much more time by themselves in their practice rooms working on what was covered in the lessons. If we don't show them how to practice, then they'll waste a lot of that time. So I spend a lot of time in lessons presenting ideas about how to practice whatever they're working on. I believe in that old Chinese proverb: give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Students need to learn how to analyze a problem in order to tear it apart and solve it. In short, my goal is to teach my students how to be their own teacher. And I always like to quote Einstein: it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stay with problems longer. Of course, different students have different personalities and will have very different ways of learning. So it's important to understand something about the learning process. We need to know, to some degree, how the brain works in order to understand the different ways of learning. I'm especially interested in the left brain, right brain dichotomy. Some of our students will be very analytical left brain thinkers, and others will be very creative right brain thinkers. We have to know how to help both types of students, and what they learn from our studio teaching may help them in other areas of life. Sometimes I feel like I have to help a creative right brain student to build a left brain that'll help them analyze problems, use their time well, and be organized in their practicing. I once had a pre-college student who just didn't seem to be able to learn and memorize the initial 2-octave Fourier scales and arpeggios that we were working on. I could tell he was trying, but it just wasn't sticking. After a few months of failure and frustration for both of us, I was almost ready to suggest that he studies with another teacher who might be able to help him more. I didn't quite get to that point, but one day he came into his lesson and absolutely nailed his scale and arpeggios from memory, and they were in tune. I was amazed, as was he. And the following week, it was the same. When we talked about it, he told me that he found it interesting that he suddenly was doing better at school as well, and his grades were better. Clearly, something had literally changed in his brain. I think it had to do with figuring out how to learn better and memorize better. In other words, using his left brain better. And what we did in his cello lessons transferred to other areas of his academic life. From then on, he was a first-class student, and when he graduated high school, he went on to college as a cello education major and is now actually teaching in a public school program here in Columbia. We don't have time here to talk about the differences between left and right brains regarding learning styles, but if you're not aware of this dichotomy, it's something really to explore, and we can talk about it more at the end of my presentation if you have any questions. I think it's one of the most important issues in understanding how different people learn and create. As teachers, we need to have a well-thought-out philosophy of teaching. In other words, it's not just a matter of teaching particular pieces of music or even having a good sequence of exercises and etudes and other materials. We need to see the bigger picture of our pedagogical approach. For me, one of the most important pedagogical concepts is to teach principles. In other words, we need to pass on the large concepts that are applicable to more than just a specific piece. For example, principles of fingering, the idea that we shift on half steps if possible, or that we don't use the same finger across strings if possible. Or principles of shifting, for example, what I call preparation and release, preparation of the arm and release of the fingers. Or principles of bowing technique that we discussed in an earlier session, such as the higher the string, the lower the contact point. These are the kind of overarching concepts that are important to verbalize and pass on to our students. I also try to help the students look for patterns in their music, which helps them learn faster. And one of the most important of my teaching principles is to teach by asking questions. In other words, the Socratic method or the Talmudic method. As teachers, it's obviously really important to be well organized. We have to use our lesson time efficiently and effectively, and we have to create short and long-term goals for the students. It's our responsibility to plan student recitals and organize group classes or master classes for the students, and to help them plan ahead for competitions, auditions, or summer programs. All this helps the students with goals to work towards, and it helps the parents with seeing progress as a result of the lessons and hard work. Cello teachers also need to have a well-organized pedagogical system that really works. We need to have good materials, use good sequencing, and we have to know the literature so we can really help the student in the best ways. And we have to make sure that we're continuing our own learning and development as cellists and teachers so we don't get stale. I still feel like I learn from my colleagues by sitting in on master classes and lessons whenever possible, and still get all the important string magazines such as Strad and Strings and the AST journal AST. And of course nowadays there's the internet, which is filled with interesting websites and videos and blogs where we can learn new ideas from other cellists. When my granddaughter started taking Suzuki cello lessons in Toronto from a wonderful Suzuki teacher there, I would sit in on her lessons, even by Zoom when I was in South Carolina, and I learned so much from these lessons. As Shakespeare wrote, "The world is my oyster," or maybe we can say, "The world is my cello." We know that balance is an important part of playing our instruments. Balance in our body, balance in our vibrato, etc., etc. Balance is important in our teaching also. Working on good balance of technique and music, or the right amount of small detail work as opposed to the big picture, or the right amount of talk versus playing in a lesson. Often, when I would observe young teachers in my pedagogy classes or those teaching in the USC String Project, I would find that they would either talk too much or they wouldn't know how to explain whatever they were trying to convey. We need to be aware of how we come across as a person and as a teacher to our students. Are we effective in using humor? Are we coming across as too lax? Are we being too much of a disciplinarian? How is the chemistry between teacher and student? We each have our own personalities, but I think we can try to adjust our teaching style so it fits the needs of our different students. Obviously, each of us will be teaching differently based on our own personalities. I'm not at all like my wonderful teacher in Germany, Marcel Severa, but I try to use some of his teaching methods when it's needed. Severa was a very Zen-like teacher. He would calmly and gently make suggestions. But if we, the students, came back the next week and we weren't able to have absorbed the new ideas, then instead of getting mad, I remember that he would just get very quiet and almost deflated. And I remember feeling horrible when he got that way. So I made a special point of not wanting to disappoint him. I would take whatever ideas he gave and massage them and work with them ad infinitum, ad nauseum during the week. A lot of other students were used to a more explosive response from their teachers, so his quiet approach wasn't always successful with all the students. I try to use a mix of Severa's Zen-like approach and the more intense approach of some of my other teachers like Tortelier and Greenhouse, as well as Paul Katz's embracing way of teaching. We obviously have to create a good atmosphere for learning, being supportive, using positive reinforcement, and having enthusiasm for what we're doing. If we're having a bad day, we can't let that get in the way of a good lesson. Someone once told me that part of the job of the Queen of England, or the King of England now, is to wave and greet people even if he or she has a headache. No matter how they feel, their job is to make us feel joy and excitement when we meet them. I don't know if that's true or not being English and never having met Charles, but it's true for our teaching. We have to provide a good learning atmosphere for the students, no matter how we feel, and make it seem like the lesson has been tailored for that particular student, even if we're teaching the same material to everyone. One of the issues for many teachers is the problem of getting bored with teaching the same technical issues to every student. If Yo-Yo Ma is playing his Dvorak concerto 4 nights in a row, he has to make it feel like every performance is the first time. In our teaching, we somehow have to figure out how to make it interesting for us to teach the same exercise over and over, as if you just invented it. And we have to listen to the same exercises again and again without getting bored. For whatever reason, this particular issue has never been a real problem for me. I can listen to the same Foyer bowing exercises number 32 to 36 again and again and really never feel bored. I guess I must be really stupid, but I actually find it very interesting to see how different students approach these exercises and what their particular issues are. And it helps me figure out what's going on in their brain so I can help them better. On some days, I might work with 5 or 6 students on the same Foyer exercises and somehow find it always interesting. But I do know that in watching young teachers, they often want to get on to the good stuff and seem not to recognize the importance of doing these fundamental exercises carefully and accurately with each one of their students. One of the prime responsibilities for teachers is to set standards for their students, including expectations for their practicing and attendance. As I mentioned in a previous session, we need to help the students with organizing their practicing and finding discipline, and especially the kind of self-discipline that'll help them not only to improve as cellists, but also in other areas of life. I once had a student I'd been teaching for a few years before she developed diabetes at about age 15. When she graduated from high school a few years later, her doctor told her that he had never before had a patient who was so self-disciplined about taking care of her sugar levels and insulin. She told him, and then she told me, that she felt it was because of the self-discipline that she had learned from years of organized practicing, working carefully on her daily scales and arpeggios, and the disciplined approach to learning and life that she got from playing the cello. The flip side of setting standards and having high expectations is having patience when a student might take longer to learn something than expected. Once again, one has to be sensitive to the different learning styles and the different speeds of different students. The best teachers truly care about what they're doing. And they're doing this for the right reason, about helping another person to learn something and improve themselves. They're not doing it just to make money. Good teachers must have an almost burning desire for their students to succeed, and they get an almost vicarious pleasure by enjoying the success of others. Teachers have to look out for the student in so many ways, making sure that they're doing the right things for the students in setting them up to be able to play the cello for their whole lives if they want, or helping them to plan for summer programs, all-state orchestras, competitions, college auditions, etc., etc. It obviously takes a lot of time and energy on the part of the teacher, but it's really worth it for the satisfaction of knowing that we're passing on our knowledge to the next generation. On the other hand, as Tevye would say, we also have to be a good business person, making sure that we're charging appropriate fees and keeping good records, the practical side of our profession. And very importantly, we have to know when it's time to pass the student on. That can often be a fraught experience for both the teacher and the student. But sometimes it's necessary to admit that the student has surpassed our own knowledge of pedagogy, or that the chemistry between the student and the teacher is not quite right. We have to know when the time is right and help make the transition to a new teacher as smooth as possible. So in summary, I think the two biggest issues for many teachers are to be organized and to help instill some self-discipline and joy for a lifetime of learning. We need to take a disorganized, mishmash adolescent brain and help them organize their thinking and give them tools for success in the future. I've been a studio cello teacher now for almost 50 years, starting when I used to teach in a little town in southern Germany, Weil am Rhein, just north of Basel in Switzerland. I had about 6 students there, and I guess I got the teaching bug at that time. I enjoyed it and found it really fascinating. And since then, I taught at Eastman as a graduate assistant, and then at Montana State University as cello professor, and then here at USC for some 40 years. And now I'm teaching mostly pre-college students and a lot of adult cellists by Zoom, which is a very different kind of pedagogy. I've had a good bit of time to think about all of this, and in thinking about what makes a good teacher, I've developed some questions for myself that I like to review periodically, a kind of self-examination of how I'm doing. So the following is what I call a studio teacher's self-examination checklist, which I often used in my pedagogy classes for young teachers and to help professional studio teachers think about their own effectiveness in their teaching. By putting these in the form of questions, we can ask ourselves about how effective we are in these areas and think about how we can improve. I recommend that every teacher undertakes a continuing process of self-awareness, introspection, and self-criticism. By the way, we'll produce a PDF of this self-examination checklist that you can look at then slowly, because this is going to go by pretty fast, and think about each of the questions after this session. So we're going to divide this into 3 parts: the planning the lesson, in the lesson, and your teaching personality. So first of all, this will be what might happen outside before the actual lesson and in preparation for the lesson. So here goes. Do you have a clear idea of your short-term, middle-term, and long-term goals for the student? Do you think about these goals and revise them from week to week? Do you spend some time thinking about your lessons and the students prior to a lesson, visualizing yourself in action, imagining your students' possible reactions, etc.? Do you have a clear idea of your priorities from lesson to lesson? Do you make these priorities clear to students? Are you aware of the balance of oral, visual, and sensory motor approaches in planning your lesson? Do you experiment with new approaches to old problems, even if they don't always work? Do you have 3 or 4 solutions for the same problem in case the first one doesn't help the student? Are you planning ahead with several exercises or tricks to help solve a musical problem? Are you coming up with new exercises to solve problems, new metaphors for addressing technical and musical issues? Are you always aware of the technical concepts you're working with? Are you thinking carefully about how to analyze the technical problems you're encountering in your students' playing? Do you practice the music that your students are playing so that you can demonstrate adequately to them? Have you planned clear step-by-step directions as to how the students should work and practice at home? And do you plan for the lesson ahead of time, or are you winging it? Next section is in the lesson. Do you have a plan for the lesson, which might include warm-ups, scales and arpeggios, exercises, etudes, and pieces, as we discussed in another session earlier? Are you aware of the rhythm of the lesson? Are you pacing the lesson correctly? Are you requiring that the student memorize something every week? Are you always working on a variety of things with your students, left-hand technique and right-hand technique? Are you letting the student play rather than dominating the lesson with talk? Are you having the student checking notes for intonation? Are you asking the student questions using the Socratic method? Do you check the student's knowledge of key signatures, musical terms, periods of history, etc., etc.? Are you only having the student do playthroughs of pieces, or are you actually working on the details? Are you only working on the details, or are you letting the students do some playthroughs of the piece? Are you praising your student when he or she has done something well, even if it's only a little thing? Are you aware of the different learning styles that people have? Are you aware of accessing the student's left and right brains for technical and musical issues? Sorry, I think I skipped something maybe, but next one is... Oops, let's go back. Are you giving the student too many left brain things to think of at one time, overloading him or her? My left brain was just overloaded, I think. Are you teaching through the right brain and not giving the student the technical information he or she needs? Does the student know his assignment? Has the student practiced? Is he or she prepared? Is the student getting through an adequate amount of material? Is the student progressing from week to week? Is the student keeping a notebook? Are the lessons being held on a regular basis? Are you making up or rescheduling lessons that you had to miss? Is there someone who can take your student if you can't make up the lesson that week so he doesn't lose a week's worth of material? Are you communicating with the parents if there's a problem? Does the student feel good about him or herself? Are you clear in your language and your directions? Do you have long-term goals for your students, such as recitals, master classes, and performances? Does your student have a clear idea of what is expected from him or her? Do your lessons begin and end on time? How musically are your students playing? Do you cover a lot of material at a comfortable level, or do you get bogged down and spend too much time on something? Does your student have enough material to practice, or maybe even too much to do well? If you spend lots of time in the lesson on one detail, will the student spin his wheels during the week with material that came into the lesson already prepared but not actually heard? Do you demonstrate occasionally so the student hears a model of sound and tempo, etc.? Do you sometimes throw out all of the above ideas and do something spontaneous? Do you spend time in the lesson discussing, practicing, and sometimes even pretending that they're practicing to see how they work on a problem? In other words, do you make them independent of you rather than dependent on you as their teacher? Are you prepared to pass them on to the next teacher when you feel that you have nothing more to teach them at this level? And so now the third section is your teaching personality. Are you creative in your teaching? Do the students feel free to talk to you about their problems? As a teacher, are you yourself? Is your teaching a comfortable reflection of your personality? Does the student have a sense of having accomplished something after the lesson? Do you have a sense of having accomplished something after the lesson? Do you feel totally involved in your teaching? Are you enthusiastic? Do you think you have a real spark in every lesson? Are you flexible as a person and as a teacher? Do you communicate to the students accurately what you mean to say? Do you admit when you're in the wrong, or do you project a false sense of being perfect? Would you teach the same way if you were being observed by someone? Is your relationship with your student a good one? Are you reaching your students? If not, what can you do to get through to them? Are you able to deal with occasional frustration? Have you thought about the student as a person, not just a cello machine that you see once a week? Are you varying your style and approach to conform with the student, or do you treat your pupils as if they came to you in one mold? Are you getting inside the student's head, trying to understand what makes him or her tick? Are you being too harsh? Are you being too lenient? Is there a rich sense of enjoyment in the lesson? Do you use humor in the lesson? Is the atmosphere of the lesson a positive one, or is it consistently negative? How musical are you in your teaching? Do you speak with a pleasing voice quality? Does your teaching have energy? Are you dynamic? Do you leave your problems at home when you step into a lesson? Do your students trust you implicitly? Have you established the kind of relationship in which they feel safe about following you into the unknown? Are you working to improve your communication skills? Do you keep a balance between holding their hand and pushing them off the diving board? Do you really care about your teaching, or are you just doing it for the money? Are you learning from your students? And finally, do you realize that if you're not changing for the better as a person, you're not changing for the better as a teacher? So hopefully these questions will stimulate us to examine our own teaching and our own teaching styles. For some teachers, this sequential approach that we've been discussing in the last 6 sessions may sound somewhat rigid. However, the intent is to provide a pedagogical framework that'll then enable creative teaching and thinking, just like our vaunted sonata allegro form creates a kind of skeleton for compositions that are all then unique. The idea is that this sequential approach creates an environment for good teaching and learning on a regular basis. But as with any pedagogical material, it's really up to the teacher to find ways to make it as interesting as possible for the student. An etude can be a boring drudge, or it can be a portal for a student to explore the depths beyond the printed page. So I want to leave you with one final thought, that with self-examination and a little help from our students, we can learn and improve ourselves and our teaching. I always have to think of what Anna in the musical King and I said, that from my students I'll be taught. If we're open to learning from our students, we can learn a lot about ourselves and what we're doing as well. There's nothing accidental about quality. When you see a good student, you know there's a good teacher behind him. And with that in mind, I hope you've enjoyed this series and that you feel like you benefited from it. And once again, I want to thank Selma Goxon, who spearheaded this project and who invited me to do these live streams, and who was always there with suggestions for improvement. And I want to give a big thanks to the staff of the British Cello Society, including Ines Day for all the communication and coordination of the website, and also Michaela Kokelin, who was so helpful with the publicity. And I also want to thank Eric Edberg, who was fantastic in helping with the technology, as well as being a sounding board for some of the ideas and content. So if you would like to contact me personally, here's my email address and the website for my book and my own website with various blogs and videos and articles. And so without any further ado, if you have any questions or comments or disagreements, please fire away.
And I'll just add, this is Eric, that we've now made it possible for you to unmute yourself and to turn on your video. And if you'd like to do that, you might want to switch to gallery view so we can all see each other. And if you've got a question, you can just speak up or raise your virtual hand, and uh, Bob will call on you.
Bob, I'd like to thank you for such an illustrious series. We all learned so much. I know I did. And and we had a lot of pleasure in the process, which is important. There's an old Chinese saying that no learning, no pleasure, no pleasure, no learning.
That's good.
Yeah. And part of the reason that the British Cello Society exists is to share these kinds of experiences with each other and to benefit from them. And I have a very strong belief in the members. Oh, thank you. I forgot to do.
What's that? Did we lose Selma?
Yeah. I invited Selma to turn her camera on, and then I think she accidentally muted herself. There we
Okay.
go.
Yeah.
So we missed part of what you were saying.
What I was saying is that the purpose of the British Cello Society is precisely to share the things that you brought, things we don't know about, things that we may not have had much experience with, and things that are of huge benefit to our daily work. And I think this series was certainly one of them. Wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you all agree? Yes. Yes. Good.
Thanks. Yeah.
Uh, do we have any questions of Bob while we've got him here?
I'm happy to say something.
Yes, this is.
I am Christina, and
Oh, okay. Hi, Christine.
hi. I just wanted to share that I have recently started taking lessons with Bob, and it's been incredible. I've learned so much, and I just think that all this forethought is not something that I had experienced much of before. So I think it really reflects in the lessons. It's just that I don't know if everyone also is that educational type. I think probably, there will be many cellists who maybe in their heart are more performers and, still need to, make ends meet or some regularity or need some kind of, structure in their work. So I just think that there may be two very separate kind of talents, and it just shows that if somebody is so extremely prepared and thought through, and also just the energy of the teacher, where you can sense that they love to educate and they love to improve, that the student actually improves and thought it through, that energy I think translates on another level as well, and inspires the student as well. And I wanted to share that, and I also wanted to share that I felt that I think I'm not really sure. It would actually be interesting to see also what you think, but I tend to jump a lot, and my brain goes to many places all at once, and to have somebody kind of lead you that way on a tightrope walk, which is, not quashing your creativity, but at the same time, kind of not overwhelming, to kind of lead you on this path, gives a sense of calm and a sense of security. There's a sense of confidence knowing, he's got it under control. He knows what he's doing, and I can trust in that process. And if I just do what is expected of me, then I can trust that my resources are well spent. So that I thought was something I wanted to share, because it really motivates me. It makes me feel very like there's a sense of safety, and then there's a sense of confidence and the sense of partnership. There's somebody in there with me who knows what he's doing, and while I have full responsibility for my part, which is self-motivated, because that's what I want to do, at the same time I know there's somebody who's leading me and able to compensate for these weaknesses that I have, that I can't know those certain things, like educational, and what the next step would be, and how far do we push. And do I need to, you know, if sometimes I felt in the past that's something I'd had to do, where I'd feel like I didn't feel safe. I felt like, you know, but why are we still doing this? Or why am I getting this piece? It's too hard for me. Or where, you know, it just where I didn't feel that sense of safety, where I felt like I had to take the reins. And the sense of being able to feel that I can trust the process and I know I'm in good hands, for me has been invaluable.
Well, that's wonderful. Thanks for that verification. I really appreciate that. A lovely comment, and it's great seeing, of course, the progress you're making. And it's interesting, actually. I think you discovered me through this series. So what's interesting is that she is actually from Austria. So you're reaching people outside of England and the United States. So thanks, Christina. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Very glad that you could join us.
Thank you. It's
Come
been
again next year. We've got another good series cooking.
ooh, okay. Let us know.
We will.
Thank you.
Bob, I just wanted to ask you, um, I teach a lot of younger people as well as more advanced students, and I have noticed through my 40 years of teaching that there's sort of a period of 18 months to 2 years, which I call harnessing the brain.
No.
One of my teachers, one of my Alexander teachers calls the mind a mental muscle.
Hmm.
And if it hasn't been asked to work in a certain way, and those people happen to join my class, then there is about an 18-month to 2 year period where they're learning to what thinking is about. And they're learning to engage in the activities, brain activities, just as they would if they were a sports person learning a game, the physical skills. And suddenly, after that 18-month to 2 year period, they start to catch fire. Sometimes it's earlier. If I'm
Hmm.
lucky, it's right away, but that's very rare. Often we go along and it's pretty much of a grind, getting the brain, they're not used to that exertion of the thinking capacity. But if you can be patient, as I have had to be very, very patient, sometimes it's 3, 4 years. But when they catch on, there's this exhilarating sense that they can do it for themselves. They can start to work along certain lines, and those lines bring rewards. And that thinking capacity is not just at the cello, but it goes in. I've had pupils who go into medicine or law, and they come back to me and they say, those sessions of learning were what made it possible for me to do well academically because I learned what it is to think and plan. And so I look at it really as what Margaret Roll said about teaching. She said, I don't teach the cello, I teach people.
Right.
And so you're educating the whole person, the whole student. It's along the lines of teaching the cello, but really it's so much bigger than that. It's about learning to be conscious of what you're doing and
Absolutely.
and
That's
how you grow yourself as a human being, not just a cellist. And then that process becomes a lot of fun also because it's about life, it's about living, it's about the joy of life. And I love working with my kids. Most of them I love working with. And so that love is a motivator. It motivates curiosity, it motivates when you're tired, it makes you step up to the plate over and over again. When really you'd rather be doing something else. So you'd rather be cooking or eating or any of other life's pleasures. But I know how grateful I was as a student to my teachers from the time I was very young. I thought my teachers were saints. That's how I looked at them because they opened doors, many doors, not just the cello, but many other things I had to learn in my life. And so I think that the responsibility we have is an enormous one, and therefore it deserves all of our effort to cultivate it, to grow it, to deepen it, as you've done. That's exactly what you've done. here in this series. And so I'm sure that people appreciate, for that reason, the fact that you've opened doors through these 7 months of bringing us this series every Sunday at 5.
It's interesting that your teaching experience very much mirrors my own, and what you're describing there is very, very similar to my own kind of experience about how your students' brains are actually changing as a result of the discipline, self-discipline that you're teaching, but just so many different levels. And it's just wonderful to see. I love, yesterday I had a student who played a recital, a senior in high school, and it was a big recital. He played the Boccherini A Major Sonata, the Hindemith Solo Sonata, and the Shostakovich entire concerto from memory, the whole program from memory. So it was a big recital. And this is a young person who, when he first came to me, he played for me, and I said, no, I don't think you're quite ready for working with me. And he went and studied with a former student of mine for 3 years. And then he came back and he studied with me for 4 years. And, playing on a really high level, completely disciplined, coming in every week really well. Well, he's going off next year to college. He's going to West Point, and he's going to become a doctor because at West Point they'll pay for his complete undergraduate education, and then his going to medical school is completely paid for. So he has a great deal, and he'll continue playing the cello. Which so I think what he's learned is it's not that he's going to become a cellist, a professional cellist, but I'm sure he'll be playing for the rest of his life and using it as a way of getting away from the difficulties of whatever he has to do as a doctor and so forth, and have another part of his life. So anyway, what we're training is much more than just training people to move their fingers well. And it's about thinking, it's about feeling, it's about all these other areas, knowledge of art and history and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in that sometimes we are also just important adult figures in the life of a child or adolescent. That struck me 2 or 3 years ago. I had a student who was a junior in high school. She wasn't practicing a lot, and I had a conversation. I said, do you really like the cello? And she said, oh, yes, I do. And then she said, it's just been so tough. And my dad is back in jail. He beat my mom up again. And my music is at his house, and we moved to my aunt's house. And I was like, oh my God, maybe the biggest thing that I'm doing is being a stable, empowering adult male for this girl, in addition to whatever we're doing on the cello. And that sense that using the cello as our playground, so to speak, we are helping these people navigate adolescence. What a privilege that is, and what a responsibility that is.
Absolutely, yeah. Any other questions or thoughts, comments?
I'll make one more comment, and then just in all the wonderful kind of taxonomy of approaches you were talking about with left brain and right brain, and explaining things using the Socratic or Talmudic method. There's a phrase that I find very helpful, that I want to help the student discover for themselves what I am communicating. And that may be through, it's actually rarely through a really good explanation. I found earlier in my career, I would do these fantastic explanations and ask the student to explain back to me what I had just told them. And it would not have registered because it was outside of what was already installed in their brain, especially if it was a really new idea. So it's finding that, try it this way. If somebody's pressing too hard, all right, really press hard and try to do that shift. Okay, now let's, lift your arm and do that shift. Okay, well, what felt better, and what, it's that kind of interaction. But it's like this, what do you do to lead this kid to the aha moment?
Yeah, and so what was the way of doing that?
The phrase for me is, well, I kind of just get really present with the student. And for each one, you were talking about some kids are, like all humans, are more left brain oriented. Some of us are more right brain oriented. Some of us, it's a different kind of combination. So it happens with each, but it's
Can you
less often less explanation and more experimentation.
Interesting. Yeah.
Chip in here? I'm Charles from UK.
Yes, hi.
Yeah, enjoyed the series in many ways, and I just think it's so good for teachers to get together in a forum without the sense of being threatened by each other or competing for students with each other. And it's a really healthy thing for cello teachers to do, but really hard to attain. So I thank you to Salma again for thinking of this and actually giving the time today to do a bit of conferring. A few things which, intrigue me really. And one is where you place yourself when you're teaching and whether you're always there, sat at that particular angle with your student. How much of the lesson are you going to move at a distance and listen from a distance? And to what extent are you going to demonstrate or not? I know some teachers, the great Rostropovich, wouldn't get his cello out at all with his students. But we're not teaching that advanced a student, and we're not using a piano probably most of the time while we're teaching, but rather than our own cellos. But you've probably got some views on this. Be interested to hear. But second question, when a student arrives and they're already dog-tired, how are you going to manage that 10 minutes, actually, that you may have, if it's a half-hour lesson, a 10-minute period of concentration, and the rest of the lesson after that's completed?
Great questions. Wow. Yeah. Anybody want to respond? Yeah. Is it Marianne?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to cite an example of a lesson that I gave this afternoon, earlier this morning, and really how we have to be adaptable, where you think you've got your lesson planned, you've read your notes from the previous week, etc., etc. And then the student comes in, it's pouring with rain, she's got rain all over her glasses, and so we all settle down, and then she thank goodness had the thought to tell me that, oh, I fell off my horse yesterday.
Oh my goodness.
So okay, so how are you feeling? Oh, my shoulders feel a bit sore. Okay, so we won't be playing in the first position then. Let's play in the thumb positions, and we do the various things that we do in the thumb positions, gradually move backwards. And I said, well, how does the G major scale feel in the first position? Oh, it's fine, actually. So it was a little bit of sympathy and focusing in on that student at that moment in time, rather than saying, okay, we finished the lesson last week with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Go in without tuning into how it is at that moment.
That's great creative teaching. That's wonderful, using the moment that was needed there for the student. That's great.
I have a comment as a parent of a cellist.
Yes.
I think good teachers are a blessing. And as a parent, I think the difficult thing is to get the child to be enjoying the cello or whatever they play at a good standard, and to keep them at it until they're old enough, because the early years are so difficult, and finding a good teacher is a very hit and miss affair in my experience. And then you're up against all the competing demands for their attention, school and screens, and
Right.
and let's face it, practicing is hard. You really have to have some perseverance. So would you have anything to say about how not to lose what must be lots of talented kids who, for want of a good teacher for the younger years?
Yeah, that's great questions. What were your solutions?
Um,
Having a good teacher like Selma probably is one of them.
Selma, who's left to, I don't know. Um, Selma is wonderful. She's made all the difference. I mean, my son started playing, cello, with the sort of kindergarten class at Royal Academy at the age of 5. Um, it's been very hard. He's been very frustrated, but he's, never wanted to stop it. And we've gone from teacher to teacher to teacher. And by sheer serendipity, we got to know Selma.
Yeah.
I guess I'm very stubborn and he's very stubborn, and that's kind of the only reason why we're here.
Yeah. So I'm not sure of your son's name, but how do you enjoy playing the cello?
Uh,
What's your name?
it's Nathaniel,
Nathaniel. Okay.
and I find it's a way of communicating. It's a way of getting ideas across without words and
Oh, yeah.
universally.
Great. That's well said. That's nice. So you love the sound of the cello and how it communicates with other instruments and things like that. That's great. And I'm sure that Selma can use that, is using that. And are you maybe working on Bach and she plays the second cello part or something like that from her book?
I think that's coming. We're doing Romberg.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Nice. Great. Are there any other thoughts on answer to Josephine's questions about that? Several questions there.
Bob, if
Going back for
people
a
would
second to
like
what,
to,
yeah, go
if
ahead.
people would like to follow up with this, can they do that? Would you allow members and people who have participated in this series to write occasionally and ask for advice or?
Sure. To any of us, I mean, there are so many wonderful teachers here,
Well,
and
you in
yeah,
particular, because this sequential approach is very well defined, but it also raises certain issues for people who are not that familiar with it. And once you start to implement something, there are always questions that arise.
sure. No, I'd be happy to have people contact me. That'd be fine. I'll just respond to the first thing that Charles had said there about moving around and not being in the same place. I think that's a really important point and one that I should probably add into one of my questions because I think that very often if you just see this person from the same angle, sitting straight from them, you don't even notice whether their thumb is round and under the second finger kind of thing and that sort of thing. So I do make a point of making sure I kind of circle around a little bit and definitely when they're getting ready for performances or even if they do a playthrough of an etude in a lesson, I'll get out of my chair and move as far away here in the room as I can from them so that I'm hearing it from a little bit further away, and you get a different sense of the sound, and also they feel different about it. So yeah, I think that was a very good point. Uh, any other questions at this point or comments, discussion?
There was one more thing that came to mind concerning this is that Zoom can seem very hard in exactly these kind of aspects. And I've been quite surprised that at the same time, sometimes you'd say, oh, something about my thumb or like my angle of my bone. I'm like, whoa, how was he able to pick up on that? So it's been quite surprising that while of course there are, some things that we can't share, or you can't, hold my hand or arm or correct something physically. At the same time, there's quite a bit that can be picked up on that you wouldn't necessarily always expect to think that they would be able to see that.
Yeah, I think Zoom is actually a really wonderful way of teaching, and I've enjoyed that. Now, we all started doing that during COVID, but I actually had done it before when I was teaching at the governor's school, and very early, it wasn't even Zoom; it was a different mechanism. I had to go to the engineering school at USC in order to do a distant thing with the governor's school, and the problem at that time was the lag between playing and talking and watching was so big. It was like 2 seconds or something, and so it was very hard to do it. So this seems magical, that you can do this, and it hardly any. I mean, can't quite play together, but and so you're right. One of the advantages actually of doing Zoom is that one can ask the student then to look into the screen themselves and see, oh, is their bow angle right? Or how are they sitting, or this kind of thing. So I find it actually has been useful in some ways. Obviously there are some things that we can't do, but we've managed to work our way around that and figure it out.
Yeah. And even just playing for you, you would think there is that screen in between, which might make it a little less, exciting, but it's just as nerve-wracking. So even that component has not changed. I don't know if it would be much different if you'd be in the same room regarding that, which is another very good practice to, little performance
Ja,
situation.
ja. Also wir sehen uns morgen dann.
Ja, genau.
Okay.
Stimmt.
Well, I
Okay.
think we are close to finishing. It's 6 o'clock. If no one else has any questions or any more comments, let's give a huge thank you to Bob, and let's say hasta la vista.
Okay. Thank you all for
Until we see each other again.
right.
Tune in. We'll be advertising our next year's series very soon. It's almost ready. And it's a 2-year one, so you got to commit to 2 years next time, not just one. And thank you again, Bob. It's been a great
And
pleasure.
thanks, Selma, and thank you all for being here. It was nice to get to know some of you. That's great.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay.
Okay.
Take
Good
care.
night and
Thank
see you.
you.
You're welcome.